This is the Sharing Without Shame podcast, where we go beyond addiction to uncover the deeper roots of trauma and shame. Hurt people. They hide behind masks. And here, we're done hiding. We're sharing our stories without shame.
Hello, and welcome to the Sharing Without Shame podcast. I'm your host, Donna Marston, and we're voted number 27 out of the top 100 addiction podcasts in the U.S. and recognized by Million Podcasts as top 100 addiction recovery and sobriety podcasts. This show is for parents and loved ones who are hurting in silence. I know the emotional pain of loving someone in active addiction and the sleepless nights, the fear, the guilt, and the constant question of, am I helping or am I hurting? That's why I created the Sharing Without Shame Reset Method, a powerful approach designed specifically for parents and loved ones to move from chaos and crisis to clarity, boundaries, and peace. And if you're ready for a real change, you can go to the show notes and grab my 5 boundaries and breakthroughs. And that's the first step in starting to take the process of taking your life back. So today I would like to welcome Burton Fischler, who holds a Master's of Psychology at a Hofstra graduate with a Master's from NYU. Burton turned personal tragedy into a calling to help others heal. He's a certified life coach, advanced CASA or certified clinical trauma professional, and the author of The Gift: From Trauma to Triumph. Burton works at a medically supervised outpatient treatment center in New York City, supporting individuals with substance use, mental health, and trauma recovery. So welcome, Burton.
Thank you, Donna.
So, first question I like to ask is, what would you like to share without shame?
That's a challenge surrounding addiction because in this society, we're back 100 years still blaming addicts for their disease. It's a very difficult thing, and it does cause a lot of shame, not only for the people who are directly affected by an addiction, but by their families as well.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, keeping those secrets does not end well. We know from the current news with the Reiners what happened to them with their son who suffered from mental illness and chemical addiction. And I tell my patients that if they have diabetes, they're not going to feel ashamed of it, right? They're going to get tested and get remedies and follow a diet and survive and thrive with those diseases. But when it comes to addiction, whether it be addiction to drugs, addiction to overspending, to gambling, to pornography, to video games, whatever grabs us and makes us put our life on hold in favor of seeking that addictive behavior.
Yeah.
Those are the areas of concern.
Yeah.
And what do parents do? In my book, I speak about lessons that I've learned by looking at the animal kingdom. And what happens to mothers teaching their babies how to survive and nudging them out of the nest. And of course, the truth, Donna, is that some of these babies don't make it in nature. So how do mothers and how do fathers and how do loving families navigate? How do they create a balance between support without it turning into enabling? And
that's walking on a tightrope because you never know.
It
right?
certainly is. And I like to inform families that maybe what's going on is a bit of shame underlying, causing them to enable behaviors that are unhealthy for them and unhealthy for their addicted loved ones. And that's an area we really need to be aware of and try to keep in our minds to make sure that we set boundaries you mentioned boundaries at the beginning of your podcast, and
Mhm.
I congratulate you for being so high up on that list of podcasts that really that get the recognition. It's such an important area.
Yeah, I was shocked.
When I first met my deceased wife, she had two adult children, I guess, who suffered from both mental illness and chemical addiction.
Hmm.
And we spent much of the time in our relationship that lasted almost 11 years trying to get help for ourselves and for them.
Hmm.
And, ultimately, we can only help people so far. They need to find something inside of them that inspires them to choose recovery rather than addiction. I
Hmm.
know
And
in
that
the
can be
six
tough.
very tough. I know when I was growing up in the 60s, there was a phrase, people take drugs, drugs don't take people. And that was part of a time when there was a lot of blame to say that the people who were addicted are morally responsible, which goes back to a notion from 1935 when AA was first formulated.
Hmm.
So I have found as I've moved forward in my journey and wound up being a CASAC, which is a certified alcohol and substance abuse counselor in New York State, I found that the fact is that sometimes drugs do take people, that it's almost like they have a life of their own.
Well, people
And
you lose their. I think when someone's in active addiction, I mean, it changes the brain chemistry over
right,
time, right? And they may have made a choice. My son made a choice to try cannabis and try alcohol, and for him, it woke up the disease. And so I think at certain points they lose the right to choose because the addiction has taken over, and that's who I'm fighting with, or trying to make sense
yes,
with,
yes,
and that's I think it's hard to put that in a compartment. I don't know if that makes
yeah,
sense, but
sure, sure. And it is difficult, and parents and even people addicted do find themselves battling with the addiction. And as you said, it is a brain disorder. It's a biopsychosocial spiritual disease, relapsing in nature.
hmm.
And the good news in all this is that we've discovered in the last 50 or so years the concept of brain neuroplasticity. That is the ability of the brain to actually rewire itself, which is kind of miraculous. It's
Mm,
like if we start to replace healthy behaviors, to replace the unhealthy ones, there's something in the brain that recognizes that. And I guess going back to the concept of evolution and the survival of the fittest, recognizes at some level that this is a behavior that will actually help us survive, right? So the brain has that preference. But the person who has the disease has to make a choice, and they have to choose. Sometimes they need to just dig down deep inside of themselves and take a leap of faith because the brain is telling them, once they are captured by a disease like marijuana in a 21-year-old brain that is not fully developed, right?
right. Yeah.
So how do they make a judgment to change their behavior? It's very difficult.
Sure.
And there are two things that we know can help. One is changing our thoughts, and
Hmm.
the other is changing our actions.
Hmm.
Now, in 1935, Bill Wilson made a remark. He said, "We can't just sit around," I'm paraphrasing, and think our way into right action. We need to act our way into right thinking because I've seen many patients who are thinking, well, I will stop next week, or I'll cut down next week, and next week comes by, and then it's next month, and then it's next year before you know it. And that's why people like James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, and recognize that we are people who enjoy success, right? Who doesn't want to be successful? Well, if
Mhm.
you're smoking 8 blunts a day and you say, well, tomorrow I'm going to stop, it's doubtful that tomorrow you're going to be successful. But if you
Mhm.
say, I'm going to cut down from 8 to 7, and then the next day from 7 to 6. Then each day we increase our chances of actually being successful,
Mhm.
and we can build on that success. We can go from one strength to another strength. And interestingly, the brain is affected by our thoughts, as we know from cognitive behavioral therapy. Thoughts affect feelings, affect behaviors. But nothing affects change in the brain like action. And that's why we need to find activities that replace unhealthy actions. I've
Mhm.
worked with many people who have been incarcerated, and they come out of jail and they say, I have to stay away from people, places, and things. And I correct them. I say, no, it's not that you have to stay away from people, places, and things. It's that you need to find healthy people,
Right.
healthy places,
Right. Change
healthy
your
things,
environment.
because we are social human beings. We are wired for love and connection.
Yeah.
And if we make the choice to make a change, and
Mhm.
we seek behaviors that are going to help us, for example, taking walks in nature, for example, meditation, breathing exercises, eating nutritiously, getting enough sleep, being still, pausing, and things like this. These are things that can help us to feel better. These are things actually we've discovered that taking walks in nature a few times a week can be more effective than antidepressants. So it's really amazing, the human body ultimately. And I remember in my journey coming across an author who said that everything that we need to heal is inside of us. And I said to myself, gee, that sounds like so much baloney, you know? How could that be? But I've discovered that the solutions are inside of us. And
Mhm.
the recommendations, the remedies don't require a trip around the world. They don't require expensive surgeries. They just require staying in awareness, accepting what is, and not dwelling on the past, but moving towards a future that's worth living.
Mhm.
And I think that aspect of finding a life that is worth living is a great motivator.
We mimic each other's behavior too, because the parents, loved ones, partners, family members, whoever, everybody's a wounded soul a little bit, right? We all have something from our childhood or a teacher or, we were bullied or whatever. And so when you're talking about, for people with a substance use disorder, that, changing behaviors as the family members, it applies to us as well, changing our behaviors. Because many of us, when we're in crisis, when we're in rescue mode, or, all that craziness that we get caught up in, until we do the work that we expect our loved ones to do, we're toxic to them. We participate in the toxicity, and we mimic each other's behaviors. And so here's this huge ball of confusion, and no one's going to get better till somebody steps outside and
Yes,
takes one step just for today and makes a change.
yes. And I think it's helpful to understand what is behind enabling behavior in a parent. At first blush, you'd think, well, you're just out to help your child. But in reality, it's that feeling inside of us that we may somehow be responsible. So it's that shame and blame that causes us to do certain things. And as a parent of an addicted child, when we feel that we're to blame, then we feel that we're not enough. And so we start doing things to make up for that. And many of the things that we do are not healthy things. The the gift, Trauma to Triumph, is about my story of living with addiction and mental illness for 11 years, trying to get the best help for these adult children of my wife's, psychotherapy and medically assisted treatments and rehab centers many times. So we
Hmm.
tried our best, but because of the shame, and this comes back to your topic, because of the shame, we did not feel comfortable sharing our stories with our friends. In fact, we lived in a co-op apartment building on the Upper East Side of New York, and it was a doorman building. And my wife felt that if she put her son on the street, as a way to indicate her sternness about the need for him to help himself, that if she did that, he would wind up banging on the door downstairs until the police came. And that shame was not tolerable to her. And, ultimately, tragedy struck because of that. So it's a very difficult thing to be a parent and to draw a line with someone who has been taken over by drugs.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's tough. And it sounds like there's embarrassment. There was embarrassment mixed in with the shame
Of
because she
course.
would be embarrassed or you would be embarrassed if he did that, where you have a doorman and, it would cause a scene, um, which is, which is not abnormal.
No, it's not.
And that's the common, we're as sick as our secret, basically. Many of us keep our secrets until we hit our enough. And typically, when we hit our enough, is when we're able to put one foot in front of the other. And for me, I started to take care of me because I couldn't control him. And I finally got that message after 10 years. It is what it is. So, what happened with her, with your wife, and you said the two stepsons, correct?
Yes.
Um, where are they today? What happened?
One of them stabbed my wife to death. So he is, unfortunately, he's not in a prison, but he is in a mental health facility. I say unfortunately because there's an inconsistency across from one state to the other that dictates the outcomes of such situations. And yet, in New York State, the definition is that if while doing this act, he was thinking he was chopping down a cherry tree, then he would belong in a mental health facility. But if he knew what he was doing, which he did, as we found out from speaking to the housekeeper and so forth, he knew what he was doing, and yet the jury decided to mandate that he go to a mental health facility. So every 2 years, he actually has the ability to go before a board to say, I'm rehabilitated. I'd like to be set free.
Wow.
That hasn't happened yet. It's 11 years. Um, So that was one son. The second son, who also had a mental illness, chemical addiction, a year after his mother died, he took his own life. So
Oh, I'm so
uh,
sorry. Thank
yeah,
God.
yeah. The book is it's written in four parts. Part one is the tragedy and the trauma. I look at what were the things that caused as best I could put it all together. What caused this to happen? I didn't want to stop there. And frankly, when I began writing the book, I didn't know if I was writing it just to heal myself, which I desperately needed to do,
Sure.
or whether I would share the story. I
Yeah.
also didn't know what the outcome was going to be. You know, people see this book and they see me sitting here speaking to you after going through a tremendous amount of work. They may forget that in between when I first started writing the book, I didn't know if I wanted to survive. I didn't know if I could survive.
Mm.
That's part one. Then part two moves on to what I call spiritual awakenings. The practices, and I use the word practices because it's important that when we find things that help us heal, that we recognize that these things must be done on a consistent basis. We can't just watch a video or a film or read a book and say, okay, I'm better, because that's not the way it works. So, spiritual awakenings was part two, and then part three was I call spiritual revelations. When I did work at the Hoffman Institute on the West Coast, it's an international personal development organization that's helped like 125,000 people in the last 50 years. And they spoke about there being four aspects of self: the physical self, the body, the intellectual, mental self, the emotional child, that emotional person inside of us who, you know, may be hurting. And then they talked about the spiritual self. And I had been spiritual as a youngster, and somehow I lost my way. And when this happened, this was a big wake up for me that, everything that I had been doing um, had resulted somehow in this tragic ending. And I had a choice. Would I let this ultimately cripple me for life, or take my life at that extreme? Or would I somehow persevere practices and treatments and talk therapy and so forth that would help me to begin to heal?
Mm.
And when I chose to share my book, to be kind to others, to be concerned with trying to help others not go through or have the tools if they are going through what I faced, that's when the healing began. When I took the emphasis off of myself and put it on helping others.
Mm.
And the last part of the book is called Growing and Thriving, because I was sitting on the couch one day, and by the way, historically, when this occurred after 11 years, I remember being in therapy and saying to my therapist, I could never work with this population. I
Yeah.
no, I just couldn't do it. And somehow I came to a point where I had healed enough that the opportunity to maybe help people who were suffering the way my stepson suffered became appealing to me. And I was sitting on the couch, and on the computer I see an email, and there's so many fraudulent emails. They're trying to get
Yeah.
all kinds of personal information, and it said that I had been selected based on my background, that they had a limited number of scholarships available to teach people how to become CASACs, certified alcohol and substance abuse counselors. And would I be interested? So I thought about it, and I said, maybe it's time to do something like this. And with that, I opened up an application that had so many personal questions, and I said, oh my goodness, I might be, setting myself up for some fraudulent activity, scam, whatever. But something inside of me said, go for
Do
it
it.
and fill out the
Mhm.
application. And they accepted me, and I did the training. Of course, I had a master's in psychology already, so this You know,
That helped.
it certainly helped. And then I also recognized that healing trauma mirrors healing addiction in many ways, because both trauma and substance use can potentially destroy you completely. And it's at that point where you go back to the choice. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was in the concentration camps in World War II. He saw his parents killed and his wife killed, and he he was a psychiatrist from Vienna, and he taught the prisoners. He said, you have a choice right now. You could either look down at the dirt at your feet and realize where you are, or you can look up at the sky and look at the clouds and let the time pass, and hopefully one day you will be free.
Mm.
And he said that, even under the worst circumstances, man does have a choice. Not a choice always, and sadly, with respect to the events that befall them, but always a choice on how to respond to those events. And I grabbed onto that message, with heart and soul, and I just stayed on that track of recovery. Today, I work with 35 patients who suffer, many of them from both mental illness and substance abuse, and I also facilitate a couple of trauma recovery workshops each week. And recently, I started doing self-love workshops, because you mentioned,
Huge,
yeah, yeah.
huge. So when you're working with your clients, I suspect most of them are had some sort of childhood trauma, or something happened, whether they were bullied, didn't do well in school. There's something, because it's not about the drink or the drug, it's the why. So what's like the common denominator of the people you work with, why they self-medicate?
They self-medicate to cope with the pain.
You're right. But
And
it's usually because, mom and dad were
something
doing drugs, or they were beaten, or they were just insecure. Nobody ever loved them. So what emotion comes up the most that they speak
I,
about?
I think that along the way, and I'll tell you why, people lose themselves. Bob Hoffman, who founded Hoffman Institute, had written a small booklet on what he called the negative love syndrome. And he explained that when we are infants, we try to get the unconditional love of our parents. And
Hmm.
our parents probably never got unconditional love themselves, so they really don't know how to give it. And
Depending on their ages, right? The older generations, you'll see more of that, I think.
more of not knowing how to give it.
Well, because everything was a secret, with like our grandparents, and right, they didn't do anything to make waves. And I think as you get into the generations, there's more healing, although there's still a lot of substance use. So maybe I'm
Yeah.
wrong. I don't know.
Well, let's say you're optimistic, and I hope you're right. But what happens is the infant in that state of seeking love figures out that he thinks, if he twists himself to be more like the mother or more like the father, then they will love him more. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, that begins a cycle that goes on for generations, where they lose themselves, and they become like chameleons, where when they're out and about in the world, they're continuously trying to please others, and they lose themselves.
Hmm.
So to me, recovery has to do with recognizing the beauty within ourselves. And this is no small task to
I like
really
that.
yeah, to understand that we are lovable. I work with patients with a technique called reparenting to
Mm-hmm.
help people to reconnect through compassion with their inner child and with their true selves, and to give themselves the love they were deserving of, but never felt that they received for whatever reason. It may be an alcoholic father, it may be an insensitive mother, it may be that they're part of a family where there's been physical abuse. There are many different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we look at our country, we are the second highest deaths due to drug overdose, specifically opioids, in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
while that number is starting to go down thanks to Narcan treatment,
Yep.
which has saved lives of, I don't know, between 45 and 90,000 people. If you take that out of the equation, we still are having far too much death or attempts at death because we're trying to mask that pain. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very, it's very real.
Well, that's a lot.
It is.
But no matter what, again, it isn't about the drink or the drug, it's the why, and a lot of it goes back to whether it's parenting. People can come from the perfect family. Of course, there's no perfect family. Let's be clear. However, that they're loved, their parents did a wonderful job and great family unit, open with conversations. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen in their environment. It could happen. And whether it's, from a sports injury or, whatever, we never know
Yeah.
what's going to just change for that person. I think for my son, I think it's in his DNA.
I think the statistic is that 40% of addiction comes from genetics, but then there's epigenetics, which is the environment that we grow up in, the zip code. I work with patients who were introduced to marijuana at age 11, and at age 15 were standing on lines outside of crack houses to get their high, and they go off course because ultimately the body is engineered to help itself and heal itself if we live the life that is in its best interest. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden, even in healthy families, you have bullying in schools, you have anger,
Teachers.
you have teachers, you have mass shootings that are
Mm.
indicative, anger that's inside children because they're told, don't feel your feelings. I don't
Right.
I don't want to hear from you. Time out. But it's
Yeah.
not time out. It's time in. It's time for a hug. It's time for love. It's time for reminding the child that they need to be compassionate with themselves.
And you can't do that in schools anymore. You can't hug. My mother
Uh,
was a preschool teacher. I mean, when a little kid comes up to hug you and you can't hug them back, how sad is that?
yeah. And
And
in
that
the
might be the only hug they ever get.
yeah. I was working with a female patient who had an opioid use disorder. And I said to my supervisor, I said, that patient really needs a hug. I said, I know I can't do it, right? In this environment. I can't do it. I said, how about this other counselor doing it, a female counselor? And the clinical director said, you know what? I would recommend that not even they do it. And it's sad.
If in treatment facilities, if having like the weighted stuffed animals that they have now for the little kids would be something that could be part of a therapy group, utilizing that so they have that weight of that love and that touch. And because I'm a retired hairdresser, people love to be touched, and especially the elderly. And they would sit in my chair and sometimes just cry, but it was like because they just needed some love and some attention.
Yeah. And because you were touching them, they felt that they could release. It was a safe space for them.
Yep.
I had
Yeah.
a holiday party last week for one of my groups, and 12 people came to the office. It was a self-love group, and they all brought foods that they had cooked at home, and it was really a wonderful get together with human connection, love, and I said to them, take your hand and put it on the shoulder of the person next to you and look them in the eyes and say, I feel the spirit inside you.
Oh, I love that.
And and speak to them and make them feel comfort. I also work with therapy dolls. I use them not only to help people go inside themselves, but importantly to hold a doll and experience it as a parent. What was it like for my mother growing up when she was a child? What was it like for my father? Sometimes that gives insights to a patient to understand where
Huge.
that came from.
I think
There,
that's
there are
huge.
therapy horses. I had my director went to a meeting. We had asked her to see if we could bring therapy dogs into the office, and she wrote back to me. She said, they said no to therapy dogs. I said, how about therapy cats? So, we all need help healing. But those things are not always available in the treatment centers themselves.
Yeah, and
Self,
everybody wants to be loved, and no matter what, whether you grew up in a household that wasn't loving and kind, it's somehow because that's the disconnect of addiction, correct? Right? Most people, when they're in active addiction, or as their life becomes unmanageable and all these different things are happening, they don't love themselves,
right.
and so they disconnect,
Yes.
right?
There was an experiment done. I'm blanking on the name of it. Something Park. Maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, they gave rats opioid water.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the rats drank themselves to death.
yep.
And the experimenter said, oh, rat park experiments. Maybe we can create a little fun kind of a park with little wheels that the rats could go on and, different ways that the rats could connect to one another. And they put two options for drinking in that rat park. One was water, and the other was opioid water. And none of the rats chose the opioid water once
Hmm.
they had the love and connections. So sometimes fun, creativity,
Yep.
these are some of the things we need to
Yeah, early
develop.
recovery, idle hands and an idle mind is not a good recipe. So as we wrap up, how do people get your book?
It's on Amazon.com. It's called The Gift Trauma to Triumph. And the subtitle is A Trauma Survivor's Memoir on Lost Love, Murder, Suicide, Mental Illness, Drug Addiction, Family Crisis, Elder Abuse, and How to Rise Up When Life Beats You Down.
Oh my goodness.
It was
Wow.
a lot. It was a lot. But the book on Amazon, if you look, you need to look at The Gift Trauma to Triumph because there are some with similar titles. If you
Right.
find mine, that's how you do it.
Yeah, and just so people know, it's like there's a split of your face. One is I think it's in color, correct? And
It's
one's
in color,
is
and one is a sad face and one is a happy face. And
yeah.
the sad face actually uh, came from 1 year after my wife's passing. I went to a intention workshop where they were focusing on grief, trying to help a young lady who had lost her uncle. And someone turned to me who was familiar with these activities and said, don't be surprised if in the not too distant future, what we're doing here in this group will help you. And the very next day, I found myself listening to Stevie Nicks' Landslide song, and I completely burst into tears, and I just lost it. And something inside me said, you know what, I want to capture this. So I took a selfie
Mm,
of that unhappy face, and
mm.
I felt that that was part of the journey. So it was the juxtaposition of the sad face and the happy face.
You certainly have been through a lot. And thank you so much for sharing. But before we go, any words of wisdom to people who are maybe sick and suffering, thinking about going into treatment, or for family members who just don't know what to do?
I like to say seek help and stay with hope. Don't alienate and don't turn away from the people who love you and support you. But the trust that ultimately, if you persevere and you stay present and aware, that there will be messages and that you will find something that you can latch onto that resonates for you.
Yeah.
It's not about being tough on yourself. You know, so many of us think that if we're tough on ourselves, we're going to get ahead, but that's the science actually shows something quite differently. If
Mm,
we are kind to ourselves, that is the beginning of healing and creating the best selves that we can possibly be.
yeah. And loving ourselves, because if we don't love ourselves, nobody can ever love us enough.
And, and to keep in mind, we do have a broken mental health system, medical system, justice system. So while we're trying to fix those things, and those are huge problems, self-care, as you mentioned in your own journey, self-care is extremely important because that's something we can do for ourselves. We need to advocate for ourselves.
And we can control it. We can control what we do for ourselves. That's it.
That's it.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
And thank you. I
You-
appreciate you too. Thank you for having me and for the wonderful work you're doing.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining Donna for today's conversation. Remember, trauma may wear many faces, but healing is about uncovering the truth beneath the pain and learning to live without shame. If today's episode resonated with you, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps this message reach more hearts that need it. If you have a story of navigating trauma, shame, or addiction and how you found your freedom, Donna would love to hear from you. This podcast is built on real stories, and yours could inspire someone else's healing. Visit sharingwithoutshame.com to connect with Donna, apply to be a guest, or learn how to bring her books, coaching, and speaking engagements to your community or organization. Until next time, remember, healing begins the moment you choose to stop hiding and start sharing without shame.